Poppies by Jane Weir was one of 10 war poems, published under the collective title Exit Wounds, which appeared in the Guardian newspaper on Saturday the 25th of July 2009. The poem was written as part of a commission by the then Poet Laureate, Carol Ann Duffy, who, with the official inquiry into Iraq imminent and the war in Afghanistan returning dead teenagers to the streets of Wootton Bassett, invited a range of her fellow poets to bear witness, each in their own way, to these matters of war. Jane Weir, herself a mother of 2 teenage boys, has said that she was thinking specifically of Susan Owen, the mother of the First World War poet Wilfred Owen, who died exactly 1 week before the armistice, when she created the persona of the mother who is the speaker in the poem. In a video available on YouTube, Jane Weir explains that the churchyard and the war memorial, which appear in the 3rd and 4th stanzas of the poem, are St Giles Churchyard in Matlock and the Pick Tor War Memorial, which she used to visit daily with her younger son when he was very little. She explains that the sight of the graves of young men lost at war made her think of the idea of losing a child, and, as she was writing this poem of remembrance, not only for the dead, but also for the living, she tried to put herself in the position of someone who has lost a loved one. This poem then explores the emotions of those left behind who are often forgotten about. Those at home who are also impacted by war, by the absence of their loved ones, whether through death in combat or through deployment in dangerous places far away. The poem is written in free verse. It has no regular rhythmic structure and no formal rhyme scheme. It comprises 4 stanzas of 6, 11, 12 and 6 lines respectively. It has a first-person narrator, I, the unnamed mother, who directly addresses her absent child, you. Although there is nothing to indicate the gender of this child in the poem, Weir has intimated in interviews that he is male, and so I'll refer to the child as he throughout for simplicity. The poem is written in the past tense. Although we know that the narrative starts on a Thursday in November, and that the events which unfold from there appear to take place in chronological order, the amount of time that has elapsed between the 1st and 4th stanzas is not clear, and thus what is also ambiguous is whether, at the end, she is grieving her son's absence from home or his loss in war. Weir's diction forms semantic fields relating to war, e.g. blockade and reinforcements, and injury and pain, e.g. spasms, bandaged and graze. Much of the imagery in the poem appeals to textures and the sense of touch. A reason for this is that, as well as being a poet and writer, Weir is a textile artist and designer. In her video, she explains that grief is difficult to capture without being cheesy, sentimental or false. She says that she tends to think of emotion in terms of thread, cloth, weave and pattern, and so decided to use metaphors taken from textiles to articulate the emotions felt by the mother. E.g. felt, tucks, darts, pleats, and ornamental stitch. She also explains that the process of felt making helped her to conceptualize grief. She says, I thought it was a good way of explaining the way grief compacts upon itself, the way the layers overlap with each other and then almost melt into a kind of solidity and form a kind of muffling barrier to pain or to anything that tries to penetrate it. We could argue that, in a way, the poem is much like a piece of felt, where layers of images from the past and the present overlap and melt into one another. The language used to describe the son's departure, the way he is dressed in a blazer, and how she smartens his appearance, could equally apply to leaving home on the first day of school, or on the first day of being an army recruit. How she strains to hear her son's voice carrying on the wind from the school playground could equally apply to a mother who is desperate for a sign of her child's presence on his first day at school, or of a sign from beyond the grave, now that he is dead. The title is a simple one. Poppies are, however, rich in significance and symbolism, standing as they do for the loss of human life in battle. They were adopted as the flower of remembrance for the British and Commonwealth dead in 1921 as a result of the popularity of the poem In Flanders Fields by the Canadian poet John McCrae. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. The poem opens on a Thursday in early November, 3 days before Armistice Sunday. The way in which the speaker notes that poppies had already been placed on individual war graves draws attention to the individual and private remembrance and grief perpetually suffered by those who have been personally affected by war, as opposed to the collective and public ceremonious recognition of the many who have died for the sake of their country, which happens on a specific date, at a specific time, and for a set duration. The speaker then introduces the you of the poem, who we infer is her son who is leaving home. Whether to go to school or go to war is not explicitly stated. The rest of this stanza and the following one focus on the mother's last mothering acts as she pins a poppy onto his lapel, removes white cat hairs from his presumably dark blue or black blazer, and straightens his collar. The emotional pain she is suffering is conveyed by the poet's diction. I pinned one onto your lapel, crimped petals, spasms of paper red, disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding around your blazer. There is a preponderance of plosive consonants in these lines, which enhance the words taken from semantic fields of pain and war. The crimped petals with their small folds and ridges become spasms of paper red. The word spasms indicates uncontrollable movements of the body and suggests being racked with pain or grief. The anastrophe in paper red, which inverts the usual adjective noun order of red paper, draws attention to the colour, which connotes bloodshed. The speaker does not say where her son is going, but only that he is wearing a uniform, a blazer which is trimmed with yellow. There is a feeling that she is already fighting her own personal and private war, even before her son has left, as her placement of the poppy on his lapel disrupts a blockade of yellow bias binding. The mother seems to yearn for physical contact in order to achieve emotional contact with her child, suggested by the tactility in the images. She tidies up his appearance by rounding up as many white cat hairs as she can with sellotape bandaged around her hand. Note the use of the word bandaged rather than wrapped. Bandaging is a way of staunching bleeding and protecting a wound. The removal of the cat hairs could be symbolic of the last vestiges of domestic life that are being shed as he leaves home for his new life. The fluidity of the sibilants in the lines smoothed down your shirt's upturned collar, steeled the softening of my face, and the long oo and ee vowel sounds in the verbs linked to her actions enhances the intimacy and tenderness of the moment. The way in which she busies herself with the superficial seems to be a way of putting up a facade. She steeled the softening of her face, suggests that she is putting on a brave face so that she does not break down in tears in front of her son. The strength of the bond that a mother feels for her child is evident in the way I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose, play at Eskimos like we did when you were little. A child is always a child to their mother, no matter how old they are, and the desire to protect them never falters. There's a sense that the mother is desperate to turn back time to a period when she could caress her child and be his protector. She's holding herself back, however, as I resisted the impulse to run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. The metaphor of the gelled blackthorns suggests a young person who cares about their appearance and who has spent time making their hair spiky with hair gel. The way in which the texture of his hair is communicated by the image of blackthorns perhaps also suggests a level of untouchability exuded by the sun, and the fact that she resisted the impulse suggests that she knows this form of caress would not be well received. At the end of the stanza, the poet uses a metaphor from the semantic field of textiles to communicate her final words to her son, as they flattened, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting. In the felt-making process, layers of animal fibres, such as sheep's wool, are lain on top of one another, wetted with hot water until they are flattened, and then repeatedly rolled until they mesh or melt together to form one piece of fabric. As Weir has explained, this image for her communicates a kind of muffling barrier to pain. So this line perhaps conjures the way in which the mother leaves her most distressing emotions unexpressed, numbing her pain through a falsely cheerful farewell. Note the way in which there is enjambment across the stanza break here. As she seems to break down inside, so does the structure of the poem. I was brave as I walked with you to the front door, threw it open, the world overflowing like a treasure chest. The contrast in the emotions of the parent and child are evident here. She is the one being brave, a word we usually associate with those actually going off to fight in the war. For her son, however, the world has just opened up. The simile, overflowing like a treasure chest, evokes the potential many new and exciting experiences that he could have. His actual moment of departure goes by in a flash. A split second and you were away, intoxicated. The adjective intoxicated suggests his exhilaration at embarking on this next stage of his life, and there is an implication that he has gone without looking back. It is only after you'd gone that she is able to give voice to her grief. I went into your bedroom, released a songbird from its cage. The metaphor, released a songbird from its cage, suggests that she has finally allowed herself to let out the tears that she has been keeping locked up. And the beauty implied by the image suggests that they are bittersweet. The next line, later a single dove flew from the pear tree, is ambiguous, both in terms of how much later. Later that day, later that year, some years later, and the meaning attached to the dove. Doves are symbolic of peace, and Christians believe that the Holy Ghost descended at the moment of Christ's baptism. If the later refers to months or years later, the dove could possibly be a euphemism for the death of her child. The dove, however, could also be just that, a dove which has happened to fly out of the pear tree at that particular moment and has made her think of her child. Whatever the meaning of the dove, it is what leads her to leave her house and skirt the churchyard walls. Her grief and anxiety are apparent through the use of sewing imagery. my stomach busy making tucks, darts, pleats, to describe the sharp lurches in the pit of her stomach as her emotions have a physical impact on her. It is obviously winter, either still or again, because she has left her house without a winter coat or reinforcements of scarf, gloves. She seems to be lost in her own private world of grief as she leaves the house inappropriately dressed for the weather. Note the use of military imagery again as she seems to be suffering in her own private war. In the final stanza, she reached the top of the hill, where she traced the inscriptions on the war memorial, probably with her finger, as she leaned against it like a wishbone. Once more, the poet appeals to our sense of touch, and there is a feeling that this physical connection is symbolic of an emotional connection between her and a monument that remembers those who have died in combat. The wishbone is, of course, a forked bone between the breast and neck of a bird, which, when the bird is cooked, is broken by two people holding a fork each in the crook of their little finger. Whoever holds the largest part gets to make a wish. Again, what she may be wishing for is open to interpretation. Is she wishing that he'll stay safe, or that he can come back to life, or perhaps that her emotional fortitude will endure? Once more, the poet employs imagery from a semantic field relating to textiles. The dove pulled freely against the sky, an ornamental stitch. This is another ambiguous image. An ornamental stitch is one that is there for purely aesthetic, rather than functional or structural purposes. If her son has indeed died, it could just be a way of evoking the beauty of his soul, which is now free. There could also be a double meaning in the word stitch, relating to the pain that you get in your side, and this could relate back to the pains that she has felt earlier in her stomach. The poem ends as she listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. If she hears her child playing in the playground, does this mean that this has all just been a terrible nightmare? When you are grieving the death of a loved one, you yearn for the sound of their voice, or you imagine that a stranger approaching you with a passing resemblance is actually them. In this sense, then, the point of the poem doesn't really seem to be distinguishing which of these interpretations is the correct one. If we return to the metaphor of the felt, the layers of these memories seem to have overlapped and melted together to become one and the same, and in this context the passage of time, and whether her son is alive or dead, seem to be almost irrelevant. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.